The gospel lesson is Luke 19, 1 through 10. Luke 19, 1 through 10. That is on page 63 of the New Testament portion of your Pew Bible, if you'd like to look at it. Luke 19, 1 through 10. And he entered Jericho and was passing through it. A man was there named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was short in stature. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore tree to see him because he was going to pass that way. When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, "Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, for I must stay at your house today." So he hurried down and was happy to receive him. All who saw it began to grumble. And he said, "He's gone to be the guest of one who's a sinner." Zacchaeus stood there and said to the Lord, "Look, half of my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. If I've defrauded anyone of anything, I'll pay back 4 times as much." Then Jesus said to him, "Today salvation has come to this house, because he too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek out and to save the lost." This is the word of the Lord. It's my daughter, Elizabeth. She's 2. Doesn't know a ton of Bible stories. But as you might expect, the children's Bibles often, feature Zacchaeus, right? So he's one of the stories. We've read a lot of Bible to her and that sort of thing, but she's not quite at the age where she's internalizing all the characters yet. I mean, she knows who Jesus is, mercifully, but not a lot of other characters. She knows who Elijah is. My other son's name is Elijah, for those of you all don't know that. But so this morning, I was sitting down at our little table to eat breakfast with my kids. And Meg said, "Hey, Paul," my wife Meg said, "Hey, Paul, why don't you ask the kids and see if they can guess what you're preaching on?" And Elizabeth might know, because she knows one other Bible character, and so she might guess it, right? And so I said, "Okay, Elizabeth, guess what I'm preaching on?" She goes, "Sleeping Beauty." I said, "No, that's a pretty good guess. I suppose I could make it work somehow." "No, Zacchaeus." She goes, "Sleeping Beauty." It's like, no, I already told you the answer. You can see, you don't have to keep guessing. So she didn't get it right. She knows now, but I don't know. She's not here to hear the rest of the sermon, so I'll have to fill her in after. I want you to think about if you've ever had an experience in which this person simply walks into the room and demands your attention. Not verbally, but just by virtue of his or her presence. We've all had people in our life like this, whether your father, your mother, husband, wife, friend, a coach, a job, a boss, some person in your life for whom you hold in such esteem that all they have to do is enter the room. And you sit up a bit straighter and you sort of shuffle your papers and clear your desk or pay attention to what might be about to be asked of you. Growing up, both my parents were good at discipline, but my dad was certainly, the presence, right? This is sometimes the case in a lot of households, and so I had and have a great relationship with my dad, obviously, both then and now. But it was the sort of thing, particularly as a little 6-year-old, where I might be doing something I know I'm not supposed to be. I might have my crayons out and sort of coloring on the wall. Did that once, thought about it the other day, because I was about to get mad at Elijah for doing it. I was like, I think I was worse, actually. I did it with a permanent marker on the back of a couch. I don't know about that one. Might be misremembering that one. He said I did it with a screwdriver once. Okay, sorry. I will say that did happen. I was taken out. I was trying to unscrew the air vents outside, right? I heard cats under the house. And I thought they were in danger. Some neighborhood cat got under our house and had a litter, and all these cats were mewing under there, and it was really annoying. So I thought it was helping them, so I was trying to undo all the air vents to get them out. When that didn't work, I used a hammer, and that is probably also what you're remembering. Anyway, what was I saying? Oh yeah, I'd be sitting there doing something, and it didn't take much. Dad walks in the room, and in case you don't know, I know you can see that he's a tall guy, but especially right, then he's standing up all the way straight, and if you don't know, then he had a big black beard, and just would walk in, and I, that's all it took. Like it didn't take it. You didn't have to say anything. I was just all of a sudden he's there, and what do I do after I begin to take note of what I'm doing. He walked into the room, and I'm like, how did these get here? I sit them down, and I'm like, yes, what is it? What would you like to talk about? And it's very clear what I'm doing. And again, though, all it took was his presence, and the reaction was immediate. Now, that wasn't simply because of fear of discipline. Obviously, as a 6-year-old, I'm sure that was a part of it. But it was also out of the honor and esteem, or the respect that I had for him then and now. But particularly, this notion, it wasn't just that I wanted to avoid punishment. I wanted to, be like a good son who was pleasing to him, and that I wanted him to look at me like I was doing a good job. In other words, I wanted his own, respect and admiration. And that was because I had such deep respect for him. That may not have been the case in your family for whatever reason, for your mom or your dad or whatever, but there's someone in your life whom I suspect is the case. For me, I was blessed to not just have that in my dad, but I also had it in my mom, but I also had it at school. I had coaches that were like this. I played basketball in high school, and I remember distinctly I had a couple of coaches who were like nice guys, good guys, but they weren't great coaches, they weren't great basketball players, and they weren't they weren't super athletic themselves, put it that way. And yet, then all of a sudden, my high school hired a coach. And this guy was a really good basketball player, good at X's and O's, and was like a weight trainer. So he was incredibly fit, and then also got us in a lot of shape. And I just remember thinking, as soon as he was our coach, all of a sudden I had a new bar, as it were, and it changed not just my behavior in gym class, but also changed my expectation for what gym class could be, right? And I remember thinking, going there, and he worked us so hard at everything, conditioning, the most basic X's and O's. We were doing, as 14-year-olds, we were doing all this crazy conditioning out in the Waco heat in the middle of the summer, and it's like 109 degrees out there, and he's having us push a truck up hills all the way around, and then after that run 2 miles, and then go back in and run and touch every single line on the basketball court. And I don't know if you know how many lines are actually on a basketball court. That's terrible. To touch every line, go back to the baseline, all the way back, etc. And we all did it, and we all loved it. We obviously didn't really love it, but we loved that we were impressing our coach, because our coach was not just skilled, but he would hand out praise. And when he praised you, it was so meaningful. We loved doing a good job for him. And actually, kind of significantly to this, we actually got a lot better at basketball. Go figure. We actually then started winning more basketball games because he was so good at this. Now, what this is, it's kind of oxymoronic, or it's a bit paradoxical, but C.S. Lewis and Charles Williams talk about this sort of dynamic in this really, really meaningful way. It's always struck me. They talk about it as that given figure, whoever that figure is for you, as a terrible good. A good that is so absolutely good that it functions like a terror to you, because in the process of being in that person's presence, you become aware of all the things and all the ways in which you're not like that person, and yet want to be. A good who is so good that it is, at least for a time, a terror to you. because you're confronted with, probably a better word for it, you're confronted with what real strength and goodness and beauty looks like. And you then become aware of the ways in which you don't match up to that, and you want to. And they call it, though, a terrible good, because it's not just that the standard walks in the room and then says, ha, you're not like this, but that it's that standard and that kind of person who's also able to transform you into it. The way that Lewis represents this often in his stories, and I won't talk about Lord of the Rings today. So I'll talk about this other little known book that I never talk about, Narnia. The way Lewis talks about it a lot, of course, is with Aslan. And you get all these wonderful scenes in which Aslan is the Christ figure in the story. Lewis is quite explicit about that. But he's a lion. He's a lion, and he's large, and he's ferocious, and he does what he will. And the first time that the Pevensey children, if you haven't read it, there's 4 kids in England, and they make their way to Narnia through a wardrobe, and then they get there, and they're like, what's going on? Why is it so cold here all the time? And then someone says, well, there's a witch who's made it always winter, never Christmas, but don't worry, Aslan's coming, and he'll make everything better. And they're like, who's Aslan? And she says, a lion. He's like, I don't want to meet a lion. Is he safe? And Mr. Beaver says, haven't you heard what Mrs. Beaver has told you? Of course he's not safe. He's a lion. But he's good. And this is the reality that the lion brings to their experience of not only Narnia, but of themselves. They suddenly once they become to be in Aslan's presence, they realize this is the terrible good. This is the good that is so good that it is a terror to me, because I realize my own shortcomings and realize that this one is the one who could change me, and I want to be like that. And so, no, Aslan is not safe, but he's good because he's the very, not only standard of goodness himself, but the one who can then effect that goodness in others. There's this other wonderful scene. It's a lot of the Narnia stories are well known. I think probably the most well known is The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. But this other one is a story in which this girl named Jill, same Narnia series, she says that she's dying of thirst. She's dying of thirst, and all she needs and wants is a drink of water. And then she finds there's this creek right here, and she can have it. So she goes to that creek, and then suddenly she stops in her tracks because she sees a lion, a massive, ferocious lion. She doesn't know it's Aslan. She doesn't know who this is yet. All she sees is this lion. And she wants to drink from it, but she doesn't want to get too close because she knows if she gets close to the water, she's going to have to get close to the lion. And so then the lion starts talking to her, and she gets really nervous about that. She's like, I didn't expect that either. And then she asks and says, well, I really need this drink. And then he says, okay, then drink. And he says, okay, but could you go away, please? Because you're a lion, and I would really like to drink water. And he's like, no, I don't move for anyone. If you want the water, drink. And she goes, do you eat people? Are you a scary lion? Do you eat people? And his response is, he says, I've eaten men and women, worlds, kings, and kingdoms. And I will devour you. I could devour you. But drink. She realizes that she's in the presence of this one who is not at anyone else's discretion, not at anyone else's fate. He is the one who, to use the biblical phrase, governs the hearts of the kings and the nations. He's the one before whom, as the text we quoted earlier from both Romans 14 and Isaiah, he's the one before whom all knees will bow and tongue will confess. And so, to be in his presence is to be transformed by his very goodness. And that, yes, it might look like, or it might feel like being devoured, but it's because what is being devoured is all the aspects of yourself that you thought were what you wanted or thought were what you needed. All the aspects of yourself that you've built either an identity around or built around some sort of system of support, and yet they're false. And so because we've so identified with those things, whether it's jobs or relationships or money or whatever it is, they become so closely identified with ourselves, and then suddenly when they get taken away, when they get devoured by this terrible good, it feels quite painful, except it's actually healing. And that's the terribleness of the terrible good. It feels like being devoured, but then that's the goodness of it. It's actually just a transformation. And it's as Paul would say, a crucifying of the self, putting to death the deeds of the body, putting to death the will and desire, etc. So that, not so that you can just revel in being crucified, but so that you can walk in newness of life. Why are we talking about this? Why would I read Luke 19 and talk about Zacchaeus and then talk about all of this stuff? In Luke 19, Jesus is this terrible good. In Luke 19, notice what happens. All that happens is that Aslan, the terrible good, Jesus obviously, enters this man's house. All that happens is that Zacchaeus wants to see Jesus. Jesus sees him, and Jesus says, let's go to your house. The next scene is they're in his house. And the next thing is Zacchaeus is repenting of all the things he's done and promising to live his life in accordance with what Christ himself would have him do. And all it took was being in the presence of this terrible good. Look at the passage again. It says, so he hurried down, verse 6. Zacchaeus, hurry, come down. I'm going to stay at your house today. So he hurried down, was happy to welcome him, receive him, which means probably a word to refer to showing him hospitality. Had him at his house and they had a meal. All who saw it began to grumble, and they said, he's going to be that guest of a house of someone who's a sinner. Then Zacchaeus stood there and said, Lord, look, half of my possessions, Lord, I give to the poor. And if I've defrauded anyone of anything, I pay back 4 times as much. It sounds like it's in the present tense, so it's probably him saying, he's naming his resolve to do it. I will pay back 4 times as much. And all that happened was, all that happened was that Jesus had a meal with this guy. In other words, he was in the presence of this terrible good, and all of a sudden, a mirror was held up to him, and he recognized that in the very presence of this terrible good, Jesus himself, he wanted to be as much like him as he could be. He wanted to be as much like God called him to be as he could be. And immediately his own response is, look, I give away half my possessions, and if I've ever defrauded anything, I'll pay back 4-fold. That sounds excessive. It's actually probably just what the Torah itself requires. Exodus 22:1 says that if a person steals an ox, then he's got to pay it back 5-fold. If a person steals a sheep and then sells it or slaughters it, he's got to pay it back 4-fold, 4 extra sheep. Now, in the law itself, that's just related to ox and sheep. But it's possible that he's using the same kind of legal reasoning or analogy is being built up here, that the fact that he's a tax collector, that means he's obviously taken revenue from people, whatever it is, in the form of either material, collateral, or money, and it may not be in his possession anymore. And so as a tax collector, he may have spent it or sold it off, and so that means he's taken it, and if it's defrauding, that means he's taken it illegally and has potentially sold it, so now it's not his possession anymore. And then, so building off the logic of Exodus 22 that requires 4-fold repayment, he's saying, look, all right, if I've defrauded anything, I'll give back 4 times as much. In other words, all of a sudden, he's confronted with the very goodness of Jesus and says, I'll do it. If I've defrauded anything, I will give back 4 times as much. And all of this resulted, again, simply by being in the presence of Jesus. We saw this again in the other passage that we looked at weeks and weeks ago now from Luke 8, and I've mentioned it a few times, but I never grow tired of mentioning it because it's such an incredible scene. You see this when Jesus shows up and the man is possessed by multiple demons and he's chained, naked, outside of his right mind, and no one will go near him. And then the scene shows up where Jesus is there, and Jesus heals this man, exorcises him, and then the next thing is everyone sees this man clothed in his right mind, sitting at the feet of Jesus. Everything about his self was transformed simply by the presence of Jesus being there. Chained, unclothed, no one would go near him, living in tombs in isolation and outside of his mind. Then the presence of Jesus, now he's clothed, sitting at the feet of Jesus, and clearly in his right mind, and people are all marveling at it and coming near. The very presence of Jesus is all it took to transform this man. And so when we're reading this story, obviously we can just delight in it for its own good because you see that, okay, this great thing happened for Zacchaeus. I'm so happy for him. But you can also rightly see yourself in Zacchaeus. What did Zacchaeus want to do? He wanted himself to be in the presence of Jesus. He may not have known what that would have been like. He may not have known what kind of effect that would have had. But he at least wanted to be in the presence of Jesus. And then when it happened, this transformation is wrought simply by being in the presence of this terrible good. And then Jesus says, today salvation's come to this house because he too is a son of Abraham. Because the Son of Man, Jesus, came to seek out and to save the lost. In other words, it was Jesus' own mission to do this. He did not twist Jesus' arm to say, well, would you please just spend time with me because, I'd really like to learn something from you. He didn't have to manipulate Jesus to get this to happen. It's Jesus' own mission to be with his people and to seek them out and to save the lost. This is the most fundamental aspect of Jesus' own mission is that he recognized that it's his own duty in obedience to his Father that he come and seek and save those who are scattered and lost. And this mission itself is probably dependent upon sort of this description in Ezekiel 34, where in Ezekiel 34, God says to Ezekiel, Ezekiel, look at all the sheep, talking about Israel as a bunch of sheep. He says they're all scattered because they have no shepherd. And all the shepherds are wicked and they just feed themselves, leaving all the sheep starved. So then God says, one day when I come back, I'm going to come back and I'm going to gather all these sheep myself. I'll gather them, I'll feed them, and I'll clothe them. And then I'm going to get rid of the wicked shepherds. Jesus is here looking at the state of his people, scattered Israel, and says, I came, as the Son of Man, I came to do just that, to seek those who are lost and to rescue them. And so that when Zacchaeus is experiencing this transformation, it's not something that he had to wheedle out of Jesus. It's Jesus' own heart and mindset to be among his people and to rescue them from the things that are oppressing them. So be a people both like Zacchaeus who seek to be with Jesus, but then also be a people like Zacchaeus who, when confronted with Jesus, we submit to the very will of God and to the very likeness of Jesus himself. And Paul says, as we've talked about often from both Romans and 1 Corinthians, Paul says this is possible precisely because Christ, whom we are going to be like, has given of himself. Yet again, he gave of himself in the cross, but he's also given of himself once more in that he's given you his own Spirit by which our hearts and minds are renewed so that we can, in fact, walk in the newness of life. And as he says in Romans 13, that we can clothe ourselves with Christ and thereby walk according to love among one another. And so it's often a fearful thing to be in the presence of a terrible good. And it can feel fearful because of the sense of pain or difficulty in the transformation. But both Jesus and his apostles talk about this in terms not simply of some sort of masochistic desire to pursue pain, but precisely rather that particular pain is the effect of the transformation of putting to death the deeds of the body and co-crucifying ourselves with the Messiah so that we'll walk in the newness of life. So let's be a people who do that. Let me pray. Father in heaven, thanks for this day. Thanks for this time together. Thanks for this chance to listen to your scriptures. And to be in the presence of Jesus, both in this worship, but also through this text in which we see that Jesus himself wants to seek and save those who are lost. Let us be like Zacchaeus who seek Jesus. And let us be like him in that we, when confronted with Jesus and when in the presence of Jesus, that we become obedient to Jesus. We love you, Lord. We trust you. We thank you for your many gifts that you've given us, for the peace of Christ that you give us, and for the gift of your Son and for the gift of your Spirit by which we're able to approach you with confidence and joy. We love you, Lord. We pray all these things in the name of Jesus. Amen.